Now we are on ending round 11 with our chain 6, and we're going to skip the chain space, and we're going to join in top of our first DC there. Now we're going to chain 2, 1, 2, and we're going to DC in that same spot there. Now we're going to work another DC decrease in this over the next 2 stitches here. So we yarn over, act like we're starting our first double crochet, yarn over, act like we're starting another double crochet in the next stitch, got 3 on the hook, and finish it off. Now we're going to chain 2, let me double check, 1, nope, we're chaining 3, 1, 2, 3. We're going to put 2 DC togs in here, so 1, 2, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC tog in each one of the next 2 chains or stitches here. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC tog in each of the next 2 chain spaces. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3. We're going to DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Put 2 DC togs in here. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3. We are then going to put a DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. One, 2. We're going to skip this chain space and put a double crochet right in between these 2 stitches. So right here, chain 2, DC tog in each of the next 2 stitches. So now we're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3. We're going to put 2 DC togs in this chain space here. Chain 3. Put DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC tog in each one of the next 2 chain spaces. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC tog in each of the next 2. We're then going to chain 3. Actually, it says to chain 2, but we're just going to keep going with 3 here, because 3. We have already started the 3. We're going to keep doing the 3. 1, 2, 3. Put 2 DC togs in there. But like I said before, sometimes you need that extra little chain in there. And I'm thinking I'm going to need that extra chain in there. I don't know what brand of yarn I used when I made the pattern, so you just don't know. Okay, so now we're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3. We're going to put a DC tog in this first stitch here. We're going to work a DC decrease over the next 2 stitches. going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, put a DC or 2 DC togs in that next chain space, chain 3, 1, 2, 3. But if you find that that's buckling too much, do a chain 2, okay, in those one spaces right here. Okay, we are now going to review this little flat section in the middle here. Okay, so we did our joining, and then we did a double crochet in that same stitch. We then did a DC decrease over these 2 stitches right here. We then did a chain 3, put 2 DC togs in this chain space, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, 2 DC togs in that chain space, chain 3, DC tog, chain 2, then we put a double crochet right in between these 2 stitches, chain 2, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog in that chain space, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, put 2 DC togs in that chain space, chain 3, put a DC tog in that first stitch, a DC decrease over those 2 stitches, then we put a chain 3, 2 DC togs in that chain space, a DC tog in each one of those, and we did a chain 3, and we are now going to get ready to do the circle part. Just checking my notes. Doing a quick read on it. Okay. So now we are doing a chain 3, putting a DC tog in each one of the next 2 chain spaces there. Chain 3, put a DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. We're then going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, put 2 DC togs in this chain space. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC tog in each of the next 2 stitches. Hear the wind blowing. We got a little bit of a cool front coming through. Now we're going to chain 2, 1, 2. I'm going to skip the chain space, put a DC right in between these 2. Chain 2. Skip the chain space and put a DC tog in each one of the next 2. So I hear the leaves falling outside. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Put 2 DC togs in this next chain space. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3. DC tog in each of the next 2 stitches here. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Put a DC tog in each one of those next 2 chain spaces. Now we are going to chain 3, put a DC tog in each one of those next 2. Chain 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to skip the chain space, skip the stitch and put a DC tog, a chain 2, and a DC tog in that chain space. We're then going to chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to skip the chain space, put a DC tog in this first stitch here. And you guessed it, we're going to put a DC decrease over the next 2 stitches. Chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Skip chain space, skip the stitch, put a DC tog, chain 2, and a DC tog in this little chain space. Chain 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC tog in each of the next 2 chain spaces, same as before, keeping that look going. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC tog in each of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, put 2 DC togs in this next chain space here. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3. We're going to put a DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. You're just lucky I'm not telling you every single random thought in my brain. Chain 2, skip the chain space, put a DC in between those next 2 stitches there. Gonna try that again. I don't like how that top started. Okay, now we're going to chain 2, skip the chain space, put a DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. Sounds like Freya wants to go outside the door. Let me go let her out. Yeah, my door, my family knows that if I have my do not disturb note on my door, they don't come in because they know I'm filming or doing something that I don't want a cat in here. My wonderful brother-in-law, Bill, he actually took one of the do not disturb signs off of a door and when he stayed at a hotel and gave it to me. Yeah. I have the kookiest brother-in-law and I just adore him. So now we're going to chain 3 and we're going to put 2 DC togs in this same spot. Some people ask where I get some of my bones. Well, he owns a farm and I get some of them from him. So we're going to chain 3 and we're going to put a DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. He doesn't raise big animals. He does chickens and ducks, and I think they have dogs and cats. So he mostly brings me deer. But I know he knows some farmers up there, so he could probably give me some other ones if I ask. So what we did here while I was talking was do a DC tog in each one of those 2 stitches, chain 3, DC tog in each one of the 2 chain spaces there, chain 3, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches, chain 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, skip the chain space, skip the stitch, put a DC tog, chain 2 and a DC tog in this same spot right here. Chain 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we're going to skip this chain space, put a DC together, or a DC tog in this first stitch here. We're going to put a DC decrease over the next 2 stitches. We're going to chain 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Skip this chain space, skip the stitch, put a DC decrease, a chain 2, and a DC, sorry, not a decrease, doing a chain 5, skipping this chain space, skipping this stitch, putting a DC tog, chain 2, and a DC tog in this chain space right there. Chain 2. Now we're going to chain 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're almost coming upon the repeat section, so we will go over what we just did in just a little bit. I am now putting a DC tog in each of those next 2 stitches. I'm going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC tog in each one of the next 2 chain spaces. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, putting 2 DC togs in that chain space there. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. Chain 2, 1, 2, skipping the chain space, putting a double crochet right in between those 2 stitches. Chain 2, skipping this chain space, putting a DC tog in each of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, 2 DC togs in that next chain space there. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC tog in each of the next 2 chain spaces there. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and a DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, putting 2 DC tog in that next chain space right there. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, putting our DC tog in that first stitch. And yep, we're doing that DC decrease over the next 2. Gonna chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and let's review because that's where our repeat starts. Let's get big. Okay. So now we did our DC tog, 2 DC togs in there, our chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, 2 DC togs in that chain space, a chain 3, DC tog, chain 2, we're skipping that chain space right there, putting a double crochet right in between these 2 stitches, chain 2, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog in that chain space, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 5, and we're going to skip the chain space, skip the stitch, and in that little chain space we put a DC tog, a chain 2, and a DC tog. We then did a chain 5, skipped that chain space, and we did a regular DC tog in the first stitch, and then a DC decrease over the next 2 stitches there. Chain 5, turn this a little bit as I'm working or reading it off to you. Chain 5, skipping the chain space, skipping the stitch, DC tog in each one of those, or DC tog, chain 2, DC tog in that chain space, chain 5, a DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches there, chain 3, DC tog, or 2 DC togs in that chain space, DC tog in each one of the 2 stitches there, chain 2, DC in that stitch, or in between those 2 stitches. We're going to chain 2, skip that chain space, DC tog, chain 2, 2 DC togs in that chain space, chain 2, DC tog, and we're going to keep repeating and going around there. So you keep going, I will meet you at the joining, and we will start round 13 together. Almost done! Okay, well, we had a slight little technical error. I ran out of room on my SIM card on my camera. So instead of frogging, I just moved ahead, and I'm going to start where the repeat for you will start. Okay, so we will be doing our joining. Well, you would be doing a chain 3 and joining right here into the top of the double crochet. I am going to now put a DC together in each one of those 2 chain spaces, or those 2 stitches right there. Remember, you will be doing a beginning DC tog, which is the chain 2, DC in the same spot, and then a DC tog in the next stitch. Going to be chaining 2, skipping the chain space. This row is really repetitive. DC tog in each of the next 2, chain 2, DC tog in each of the next 2, at least I had the repeat to work with you. Chain 2, or sorry, that's a chain 3. Going to put a DC tog in each one of the chain spaces there. I also noticed in that I might have been doing my microphone the wrong way, so it might not have been picking up my voice as loud as it should. So I will just try to make sure that it's totally ramped up for you. Chain 3, do a DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches, chain 2, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches, chain 2, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. It's a pretty boring, straightforward row or round. Chain 2, 1, 2, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches, chain 2, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches, chain 2, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches, chain 3, DC tog in each one of the next 2 chain spaces, chain 3, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches, chain 2, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches, chain 2, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches, chain 2, and let's review. Okay, so we started right here. Remember, I'm on my second because I had technical issues. So you're going to be starting right here, and you're going to do your joining of a chain 3, your chain 2, and a double crochet in that same spot, and a DC tog in that next stitch. Okay. Then we're going to chain 2, DC tog in each one of those stitches, chain 2, DC tog in each one of those 2 stitches, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 2, DC tog, chain 2, DC tog, chain 2, skipping these 2 chain spaces right here, DC tog, chain 2, DC tog, chain 2, DC tog, chain 3, and then we're going to put a DC tog in each one of the next 2 chain spaces, chain 3, DC tog, chain 2, DC tog, chain 2, DC tog into each one of those 2 stitches. Now we're going to keep going. I feel that it's just so repetitive. Luckily we're on the back half of round 13. Well, I am. You still got to do the back half. I'm almost done with the round 13. So now we're going to skip chain space and DC together in the next 2 stitches, chain 2, DC tog in each of the next 2 stitches, chain 3, because we're doing this section, DC tog in each of the next 2 chain spaces, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC tog in each of the next 2 stitches, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. I ate a bowl of my soup while my microphone and stuff was charging. I need to take a little thumb break. 1, 2, put 2 DC togs in this chain space. So here's a picture somewhere on the screen of my bowl of soup. Chain 2. I have the cabbage, we'll call them cabbage noodles, regular egg noodles. Got carrots, celery in there, and yes, those are serrano peppers in there. And there's onion, of course. 1, 2, 3. Yep. And yeah, I like spicy food. So that serranos and jalapenos just add a little bit of heat, just a tiny bit of heat. You don't want to kill your palate. Okay, so now after this skull, we're going to be doing chain 3s. Okay? So we are switched from chain 2 here. Now we're going to be switching to chain 3 right here. So this skull right here marks the change in amount of chains in the chain space. So we're going to chain 3, DC tog in each one of those 2 chain spaces there, or those 2 stitches there. Chain 3, DC tog in each one of the next 2. Chain 3, DC tog in each one of the chain spaces. One, 2, 3. Chain 3 there. Do a DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. Now this is going to be where the pattern differs just a little bit. So we're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3. We're going to put a DC together right here in this chain space, right next to that stitch. Now we're going to put a DC together right inside of that stitch. We're going to chain 2. We're going to skip that chain space and put a DC together right into that next stitch. Now we're going to put a DC together right into that chain space right next to it. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Put a DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3, put a DC tog into that chain space right next to this stitch here. DC tog into the next stitch. Chain 2, skip the chain space, put a DC tog into the next stitch. Put a DC tog into the chain space right next to that stitch. Chain 3, put a DC tog into each of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3, put a DC tog in each one of those next 2 chain spaces. Chain 3, DC tog into each one of those next 2 stitches. Chain 3, DC tog in each one of those next 2 stitches. Anubis is now outside my door. He can't come in because he'll jump on my desk. Chain 3, DC together in each one of the next 2 stitches. Right here we are going to chain 3 and skip these 2 chain spaces and put a DC tog in that next stitch there, as well as the next one. Going to chain 3, skip chain space, and put a DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3, put a DC together in each one of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3, turn my piece just a little bit, put a DC together in each one of the next 2 chain spaces. chain 3, put a DC together in each of the next 2 chain spaces, chain 3, put a DC together right into this chain space right next to that stitch, do a DC together right into the next stitch, chain 2, put a DC, skip that chain space and put a DC together into the next stitch, put a DC together into that next chain space right next to that stitch, chain 3, put a DC together in each of the next 2 stitches there, chain 3, put a DC together right into that chain space. We will review once we get to the well, for me it will be the end. For you it will be the repeat point. Put a double crochet or a DC together right into that same, or that next stitch there, chain 2, skip the chain space and put a DC together into that next stitch, DC together into that next stitch, or the chain space right there, chain 3. I had to turn my piece just a little bit. We're going to put a DC together in each one of the next 2 chain space or stitches. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm getting a little tired here. This is the end of round 13 for me. Okay, chain 3, the halfway point for you of round 13. So we're almost done. DC together in each one of those 2 chain spaces, chain 3, DC together in each one of those next 2 stitches, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, DC together into that next stitch, and DC together into that next stitch, chain 3, that's the last chain 3 for going around the bend. We're going to put a DC together in each one of those next 2 stitches, we are now switching over to a chain 2, skipping the 2 chain spaces and putting a DC together in each one of those next 2 stitches, chain 2, DC together and one in each one of the next 2 stitches, chain 2, DC together into each one of those next 2 stitches, chain 3, because it's that one spot right here. We're going to put a DC together in each one of those 2 chain spaces, chain 3, 2, 3, DC together in each of those next 2 stitches, chain 2, DC together in each one of those next 2 stitches, and then I'm ready to start or to do my joining and start row 14. So let me just do my last chain 2 here, pull it out, and I'm going to do a quick review for you. Now this side of this skull right here, of the bend, because we have the bend right here, this side of the skull, we have our chain 2, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 2, DC tog, chain 2, DC tog, chain 2, DC tog. Now on that side of the skull, we're going to switch to chain 3s. So we have a chain 3 here, a DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, and then in this chain space, we're going to do a DC tog right into that chain space, a DC tog into that next stitch, chain 2, we're skipping that chain space, we're going to put a DC tog in that next stitch, DC tog into the chain space, chain 3, DC tog into each of the next 2 stitches, chain 3, DC tog into the chain space, DC tog into the stitch, chain 2, skip the chain space, DC tog into the next stitch, DC tog into the chain space, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, chain 3, DC tog, 3, DC tog, 3, DC tog, 3, and it's 3 all over there. And then once you get to, remember this side of this skull on the opposite side, those are 3s because this is the bend. Okay, so then when you get to the skull, you do 2, DC tog, 2, DC tog, 2, DC tog, 3, and a DC tog in each one of the chain spaces, chain 3, DC tog, and we're finishing our end with a chain 2, DC tog, yes. Okay. Yeah, it's kind of repetitive, so that's why I didn't go over the very last thing. Now, so you go and pause here and go do your round, and I will meet you back right here. Okay, welcome back. We are now on the ending of round 13, and with that, we are going to not make a chain right here before our joining. We are going to move our beginning, if that makes sense. Okay. So we're not going to do a chain 2 there to connect it. We're going to actually make a double crochet into that top first stitch right there, that first DC. So we're going to yarn over and just work a double crochet right into that first stitch. Okay. Now I do this type of thing a lot in my patterns where I now moved my beginning. So now the way in the pattern I have it is where you're going to flip this over, make a stitch, yada yada. I'm going to show you the easy way to do this. We're going to chain 1, and we're just going to put our hook right in, is it right in between there? Yes. It's right in between here. We're just going to put a little slip stitch. Or actually it's going to be easier to make a single crochet right there. Okay, now we're there. No flipping. Yeah, no happy horse junk. Just right there. Okay. Now we're going to chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Let me do that again for you just in case you missed it and you need to review that. We ended round 13 with a double crochet right in top there. We're going to chain 1, and we're going to slip stitch or put our hook in between those 2 stitches, go and pull up a loop, bring it up over, and make a single crochet right there. Okay, so easy peasy. Yeah, it's easier to show you on something like this than try to explain it to you in writing, so that's why I do the flippity flip flips over there. But now you know it's as simple as that. Okay, so now I'm going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3. We're going to skip this chain space. We're going to put a DC together right into this next stitch. Now we're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3. We're going to put a double crochet right in top of this last stitch here. Part of my rice cake on my finger. And now we're going to do that once again. So chain 3, 1, 2, 3. And we're going to put a double crochet right into the top of that DC right there. Okay. Now we are going to slip stitch in top of this stitch right there. Okay. Now we'll keep going and then I'll show you how that looks in just a moment. Now we're going to put a DC together right into that next stitch. Okay, let's chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and let me show you and go over what we did here. So, take out my thing here. So we ended row 13 with a double crochet into the top here. We then chained 1, put our hook through between these two, pulled up a loop, and then ended up making a single crochet right here. Okay, so we pulled up a loop and then yarned over and pulled through the loops that were on our hook. We then chained 3 and we put a DC tog right into this next stitch. We chained 3, DC in top of that same stitch right there, chained 3 again, DC'd in top of this stitch up here, and then we put a slip stitch right in top of here. We're going to be doing more of those, so if you didn't get it this time, I will be getting it again, but you can rewind. I'll keep showing you the next few of them because it'll keep making sense then, okay? So now we put a DC tog right into this next stitch and we chained 3. So now we're going to put a single crochet right in between those two stitches there. Chain 3. We're going to put a DC tog in each one of the next two stitches. Going to chain 3. Put a DC tog in each one of those next two chain spaces. Are we all celebrating as our last round? Chain 3. Of course, I didn't set it up so my computer doesn't shut down. So after that one, we're going to chain 3. We're going to put a DC tog in each one of these next two stitches here. We're going to, let me see, are we going to chain 2 or 3? Let's see. We're going to chain 3. So we are going to do 3s on all these wonderful things. So got to keep that in mind. Okay, so now we are going to chain 3 right here. We're going to put a DC tog in this stitch. We're going to chain 3. We're going to put a DC into that stitch, that one right above it there. Going to chain 3. And we are going to put a slip stitch right in top of that last stitch, or right on top of that DC tog right there. And we're going to put a DC together right into that next stitch. Chain 3, DC tog in each of the next 2. Chain 2. Can really hear my bracelets jingling. My wrist must not be that swollen right now. Let me get my bracelets down. Okay. Now put a DC tog in each one of those next 2 stitches. Chain 3. DC tog into that next stitch there. Chain 3. Double crochet in top of the DC tog. Chain 3. Double crochet into the top of the last double crochet that we made there. Now we're going to slip stitch into the top of the DC tog. And we're going to put a DC tog into the next stitch. Chain 3. DC tog into each one of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3. DC tog into each one of the next 2 chain spaces. Chain 3. Right here we're going to put a DC together, one in each of these. We're now going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3. We're going to put a single crochet in between these 2 stitches. Going to chain 3. We're going to put a DC together right into this next stitch. Chain 3. DC together, or sorry, a double crochet right in top of that stitch there. Chain 3. Double crochet in top of that last stitch. You're basically just putting your hook through at least 2 of the loops, okay? Now we're going to put a slip stitch in top of this DC together. So find 2 loops, stick them through there. And now a DC tog into that next stitch there. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3. And we're going to put a single crochet right in between these 2 stitches. Chain 3. DC together into each one of those next 2 stitches. Chain 3. DC together right in between these 2 stitches here. Or, I mean, those chain spaces, just like we did before. Chain 3, DC together in the next 2 stitches here. I gotta move my pattern up so that way I can read it. Oh, so I think we already did a review, but let's go do another review real quick. So we did our DC together here, we chained 1, put our hook through this, pulled up a loop, went yarned over, put through, and did our single crochet right here. Chained 3, DC tog. Top of that we chained 3, DC on top of the DC tog, chain 3, DC on top of the DC right there. Then we slip stitched right in top of this DC tog. Putting a DC tog in this next stitch here. Oh, my microphone just died again, so I will just take it off and yeah, this has been a long doily. It's been a really long doily, that's why. So I will just make sure I really bumped up the volume when I do my thing. So let's see, where were we? So a DC tog right here, chain 3. We're going to put a single crochet in between these 2 stitches here. And this is right above the pineapple. Okay. Looks like a little person carrying water buckets. Jack and Jill went up the hill. Okay. Chain 3. We're going to be putting a DC together in each one of the stitches. Chain 3, DC together in one in each of the chain spaces there. Chain 3, DC together, DC together. Chain 3, DC together into the chain space or the stitch right here. We chained 3, DC'd on top of that DC together, chained 3, DC, or put a DC in top of that double crochet, and then we took that whole thing and we slip stitched right into that top of that DC together. Then we put a DC together into that next stitch. Chain 3, DC, DC, chained 2, DC, DC, chained 3. Then we did one of our little thingies once again. I'm not going to go over it. Then we did our DC together, chain 3, DC, DC together, chain 3, DC together, DC together, chain 3, single crochet in between these next 2 stitches right here. We did a chain 3. We did our same thing we've been doing. Chain 3, single crochet in between those 2 stitches, chain 3, DC together, chain 3, DC together, DC together, chain 3, DC together, DC together. Okay. So now we are going to, I'm just reviewing the pattern, making sure I got it right for us. Okay. Sure I'm in the right spot here. Okay, so now we're going to chain 3, putting our DC together right here. Once again, we're going to chain 3, putting our double crochet in top of our DC together, chain 3, putting a DC together, or a DC right on top of that last double crochet, and then we're going to put a slip stitch in top of this DC together. We're going to put a DC together right in top of that next stitch, chain 3, DC together in each of the next 2 stitches, going to chain 2, DC together in each of those next 2, chain 3, going to make one of those things again, the DC together, chain 3, DC, the pattern's going to change in just a moment, so stick with me. DC in that same stitch there, chain 3, double crochet in that in top of the last DC. Going to put a slip stitch in top of the DC together. Going to put a DC together right inside the next stitch there. Chain 3, DC together in each one of the next 2 stitches. Going to chain 3, put a DC in each one of those chain spaces. This has a very simple looking border, but it's not that simple, is it? We're going to chain 3, put a DC together in each one of the next 2 stitches. Now this is where it's going to get a little different. We are now going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to put a DC together in each one of the next 2 stitches. We're now going to chain 3. 1, 2, 3. We're going to put a single crochet in between these 2 stitches. Chain 3. We're going to put a DC together in this next stitch here. We're then going to make another one of those little bumps. Chain 3, DC in top, chain 3, DC in top, and then slip stitch in top of that DC together, DC together in that next stitch there, chain 3, skip the chain space, skip the stitch. We're going to put a single crochet right in between those 2, chain 3, put a DC together in each of the next 2 stitches, chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, put a DC together in each one of those next 2 stitches, chain 3, DC in each one of those chains, chain 3, DC together in each of the next 2 stitches, chain 3, DC together into that next stitch. Going to be making one of those little bumps, so chain 3, DC in top, chain 3, DC in top, and then we end with a slip stitch in top of that beginning or that DC together. Now we're going to put a DC together into that next stitch there, chain 3, DC together in each one of those next 2 stitches, chain 3, gonna put actually we can chain 2 there, pattern says chain 2. Guess they're closer together this time. So chain 2, put a DC together in each one of those next 2 stitches. Chain 3, making another one of those little bump things. So DC tog, chain 3, DC on top of that, chain 3, DC. We're coming to that one weird little area again, so bear with me. Then I will set you free on your own. And then I'll meet you at the end of the doily. So then slip stitch on top of that last DC tog into the next stitch there, chain 3, DC tog into each one of the next 2 stitches, chain 3, DC tog in each one of the next 2 chain spaces, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches, chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to skip the chain space and put a single crochet right in we're going to put a DC tog in each one of those. Woohoo, I almost messed us up. But I didn't. I caught myself. So it's a DC tog in each one of those next 2 stitches. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Now we put a single crochet in between those 2 stitches there. Chain 3, DC tog. We're making one of those little bumps again. So chain 3, DC in that top of the DC together, chain 3, double crochet in top of the last double crochet, and then we're going to slip stitch in top of the DC together. And then we're going to DC together into that next stitch. Chain 3. We're going to put a single crochet right in between these 2 stitches here. Chain 3. DC tog in each one of those next 2 stitches. Chain 3, DC tog in each one of those next 2 stitches, chain 3, DC tog in each one of those next 2 chain spaces. We're almost to the repeat spot. Chain 3, DC together into the next 2 stitches, chain 3. Right here we're going to do one of those bumps, so those bump outs or whatever you want to call them, decorative fingers, I don't know. But I'm going to start this one over again because I didn't like where that stitch was going. We're doing a DC together in that next stitch there. Chain 3, double crochet in that in top of the DC together. Chain 3, DC in top of that last double crochet. Now we're going to slip stitch right into the top of that. Find 2 chains. Find 2 loops, put that in there, put a slip stitch in there, DC tog into that next stitch, chain 3, DC tog into each one of the next 2 chain spaces, or it's 2 stitches. Ooh, it's coming to an end. I'm getting tired. I haven't reached that euphoric part of the end of a doily yet. Chain 2, DC tog in each one of the next 2 stitches, chain 3, doing another one of those little bumps right here. So do our DC together, chain 3, DC on top of there, chain 3, DC on top, and then a slip stitch in top of the DC together. Just find 2 loops, 1, 2, put a slip stitch in there. Come on. I said put a slip stitch in there. Don't fight me on this. Slip stitch, thank you. Okay, DC together into that next stitch. I might be getting a little squirrely around the edges there. Okay, chain 3, DC together in each of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3, put a DC tog in each one of those next 2 chain spaces. Chain 3, DC tog into each of the next 2 stitches. Chain 3. This is where our repeat starts, because we're right above a pineapple. So we're going to chain, we have our chain 3. We're going to put a single crochet in between those 2 stitches. Chain 3. We're going to put a DC tog right here. Do a chain 3, making one of those little bumps again. DC on top of our DC tog, chain 3, DC on top of the DC tog, and then a slip stitch in top of that DC tog right there, and then a DC tog right next to it. Okay, so let's do a quick little review. Let's move my hook. Just hit up some points of interest. Over the skeletons in this space is a chain 2. We do our little bumpity bumps over here. Just over this one, we do, it's very weird, we do our chain 3, our DC together, chain 3, and then in between these 2 stitches, we do our single crochet, chain 3, we make one of our little bumps, chain 3, single crochet in between those 2 stitches, chain 3, we do our 2 DC togs in each one of those. Okay, go rewind and work your second round, and I will see you at the joining of round 14, okay? So we can end this together. Okay, be right back. Okay, everyone, I just finished my last half of my, I told you this thing was going to be huge, very, very huge. I just finished my last half of this. I'm hoping I have, yeah, that board might be able to fit this. And I will show you a picture of it pinned in just mere moments. But we are going to end with a chain 3, and we're going to skip this last chain space here, skip this stitch, and we're going to put a slip stitch right in top there. Actually, we're just gonna, you can put a slip stitch there. I'm just gonna put another single crochet there. Make it easy. I'm getting tired. And then just do a slip stitch around that chain just to finish it off. Okay, so let's finish this off and we will tuck in the tails. Doesn't that feel good to finish this big old monstrosity of a pretty piece? Oh, yes it does. Okay. Now remember, if you're working with vintage thread, please be very careful when you do your knots like that. And then I'm going to just tuck it in, work my way down, pick up my thread, and tuck it in here. I just want to say thank you for hanging out with me and crocheting this magnificent big piece with me. And if you missed, this is going to be probably broken up, the stars and then some rounds and then some other rounds before we finish off, so because it's going to be very long. So thanks for sticking around with me, and if you missed any of the other sections, I will have those linked down in the description below. If you want to show me your finished piece, if you did it in multicolors or anything, message me and let me see it. Okay, I'm going to end this video with a picture of it completely pinned and a picture of, not this particular one, but of another one, same pattern, on a beautiful table dressed as like a little altar scarf. So thank you for being with me, and don't forget to link and subscribe and hang around for just a couple extra seconds. So that way you can see it. I'm literally pointing it back at me and you guys can't even see it. So stick around for just a couple more moments and see it pinned in all of its glory. So thank you so much, and you have a wonderful, wonderful day.